In the climate justice system, people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups. Big oil, who want to continue business as usual at any cost, and the few people brave enough to take them to court. These are their stories.
The climate targets that they've set there, that they violate their fundamental rights, especially the rights to life, to security and equality. So that's equality is more about future generations, indigenous peoples, and how they are disproportionately impacted by climate. So it's a huge case.
I'm Richard Delevan. Welcome back to Wicked Problems. Welcome back to our occasional series, Oil Fought the Law, tracking climate litigation around the world. I was at a couple of events last week in London where this came up, and for some people, it's still a new concept. They're only vaguely aware of some of these lawsuits and new legislation that's happening. So we thought it would be great to continue this occasional series by bringing on Loes van Dyke, who hopefully will be able to join us on the regular, founder of Climate Court, which is a great resource for tracking a lot of this litigation around the world, whether it be rights-based, whether it be tort-based, whether it be things that are seeking to increase transparency or indeed punish greenwashing. So we're so glad you could join us for this, reflecting on her roundup, which she puts out every week at Climate Court. And you can sign up for her updates to get that, and we will continue to post them here and on our social channels. But anyway, hopefully you enjoy this, and if you're hearing this after the fact, if you're hearing this a little bit later than other people, you could be a subscriber at Wicked Problems Earth, and you could be getting this first into your inbox with no ads. So I encourage you to check that out. Anyway, thank you. Here's Loes van Dyke. Loes van Dyke, founder of Climate Court. Welcome back to Wicked Problems.
Thank you so much. Good to be back.
It's been a while, but gosh, no rest for the wicked. Quite a lot's happened in your space, as you're one of our foremost experts on climate litigation that has been generous enough to come on the show a couple times. So would love to get your impressions. I think the big story this week, and I think you've got another newsletter coming out presently as we're taping. But the big story you were writing about this week was to do with BlackRock and the financial sector and Client Earth lodging a complaint in not perhaps the usual way, but tell us more about that and what was that about?
Right. Yeah. So it's a complaint that was filed in France about how BlackRock is marketing its funds. So they are basically saying this fund that we are using with your money, with your private money, is sustainable. We're using it for sustainable goals, and then actually, what happened is that another organization, they were looking into it, like how much of this money is actually being used for sustainable goals, and they saw that there was in some of these funds really large shares, up to 27%, is still being invested in fossil fuel companies.
Wow.
And 27% is it's huge. It's a huge chunk of money, because some of these funds, they contain like millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars. So what Client Earth is saying is, you're marketing it one way. You're marketing it to attract people that actually want to mean something for the environment and that want to contribute positively to the environment, but you're using their money and then still allegedly investing it in companies that harm the environment and that are working against climate change, climate improvements, climate action,
Right.
which is it's horrible.
And so, and again, so the companies that we're talking about, again, I think your piece suggests, it's the oil majors. That's part of that 27% of the assets under management, and that's where obviously it's going to stick in the craw of a lot of folks. And it's I suppose it's more now than it was, right? Because again, you've got your BPs of the world basically saying, yeah, we're not going to keep even saying that we're going to do the thing. We're just going to go back to pumping oil.
Yeah, exactly. They're all kind of using similar arguments from what I've seen. Every single lawsuit in different jurisdictions, they're using similar arguments, saying, if we're not doing it, if you're stopping us from doing it, someone else will jump in this gap, even though there is actually scientific proof that is not the case. There is arguments about energy security, energy affordability, and they're just recycling the same arguments over and over and over.
Yeah, no, it's an old story, and I suppose we'll keep an eye on that. I mean, I've not seen any comment back from BlackRock, but I guess that you can anticipate, as you just said, that the arguments that they would trot out would be similar. I guess from a fiduciary point of view, point of view, depending on the jurisdiction, um, obviously, this is in France, but there might be places where the litigation might run afoul of rules setting that say, well, if you're investing in a fund, if the fund's kind of promise is to maximize returns, for investors, then, like saying that they are somehow that one claim trumps the other, that the claim that they're, going to have a on balance greener portfolio. Do you think that there might be a court that might hear that and go like, actually, no, that the people who are saying that, maximizing return is why you're here. Therefore, why are you wasting my time with this other stuff? I just want my money if I'm a pension fund or whatever.
Right. So with fiduciary duties, it's kind of a difficult argument still, especially looking at investments. So there's one argument for company directors, but then in this scenario, I think it's very much 50-50 in terms of what they should be doing. And of course, there's a laws telling them what they should be doing and what they've been doing. But now we're trying to expand that notion of fiduciary duty, at least in the climate space. It hasn't been expanded legally yet. So there is no legal requirement for them to take into account climate or to take into account ESG. But you could argue that under these marketing laws, especially in France or in the EU, in the US as well, that they should be honest and open about what they're doing either way. As I mentioned as well in the article, is that there's also a counter trend happening in the US mostly, where it's the opposite way, where they're suing BlackRock and going after asset managers because they're investing in ESG and because they're spending too much money, too much time, too much effort into looking into these ESG topics. So there is something to be said about that as well. I don't support it at all, but like I conclude, it's really just about transparency and following up. If they want to be a horrible company and continue to invest in fossil fuels, that's one thing, but then be open and honest about it. Don't say you're doing one thing and then do the other.
I think that's interesting. I think that's where Klein Earth has been so good in many jurisdictions going after that, whether it's the Advertising Standards Authority here in the UK. Again, we've seen some other litigation in the States. I think since we spoke, California filed another suit related to plastics, again, related to claims, false claims about, what was happening with all those things with the 3 arrows going together, on all pieces of plastic. As it turns out, that was all a lie, which I love, which is great. Anyway, so other things that you're looking at this week. I know that you had something from Australia in a similar kind of vein about greenwashing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, more greenwashing. They're going after an airline there. It's one of the biggest ones in Australia, because very similar to a couple of months ago in a case in the Netherlands against KLM, where they were claiming to use sustainable aviation fuels and the carbon offsetting, when you book your flight and it says, do you want to offset your flight? And at the time in the Netherlands, it was said this is greenwashing because it's scientifically, it's just not adding up. It's not that contributing that much to your net zero goals, and it's misleading. And Australia they're now using these arguments that they used in the Netherlands as well, and they're saying, that this is what happened in the Netherlands. Following that, it happened in the EU. The European Commission was going after all of these different airlines, and we also should set this precedent, saying airlines shouldn't be getting away with marketing these not really environmentally friendly practices as though it's really benefiting the climate.
Right.
Yeah, so that's Australia. That's the only other greenwashing one this week that I got.
And then in Canada, where some of our favorite youth activists are back. So go on, tell us about what's happening in Ontario.
Right. Yeah. So this is one of the other big ones. This is a huge one actually. So Court of Appeal in Ontario, they said that the climate activists are right in their argument that the climate targets that they've set there, that they violate their fundamental rights, especially the rights to life, to security, and equality. So that's equality is more about future generations, indigenous peoples, and how they are disproportionately impacted by climate. So it's really it's a huge case actually. It's very similar to what happened in the EU where everyone was talking about it, but the Swiss case, the climate-induced, because again it's about their fundamental human right to life, for example, or like really the most basic rights that you have, and now they're saying by not setting proper targets, you're violating their rights because you're not doing enough. And the court has now said, not asked, but decided that they have to really justify their climate policies now in the next upcoming hearings. So it's really interesting to see, and it's a big win actually. So because especially in Canada, with Indigenous peoples, there's a whole nother aspect of violations that we don't really consider often in the EU. Really interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting to see how these cases learn from one another, or the litigants learn from one another, right? So I think a lot of people anticipated that the climate-induced case, even though I guess the Swiss Parliament was like, yeah, whatever, after the ruling, but basically other people around the world could pick out the logic of the case and apply it. And it seems to be something that's kind of happening here in Hawaii and some other places where, again, the argument is you government are not doing enough to protect the citizens you are duty bound to protect their rights, and therefore your failure to do so is actionable, and we should be you can be forced to take different policies. Is that basically it?
Exactly. That's what I like about climate litigation at the moment, is that it's in theory it's so inappropriate as a system, is a legal framework to address a problem that is as global as climate change, because you're so limited to the individual countries. But what you're seeing now is that they're just taking the ideas from one case and then adjusting it. The lawyers, they're adjusting it to their own jurisdictions, adding things, changing things, and it's really interesting to see that for these climate litigation, the basic ones, the original cases, like the one in the Netherlands against the government, it's been replicated across the world now, because it's you can recognize it in Korea, in Japan, in South Africa, in Canada now, and in the EU. So it's really it's everywhere. So it's really good to see that how they're using experiences and how they're using precedent in different countries.
No, I think it is fascinating. So what are the other big ones that are on your horizon for this week?
So in my roundups, I like to include, so it's mostly climate litigation, but I do focus on some environmental cases as well. Environmental law, environmental litigation is a much bigger, broader topic, and climate litigation is just a subtopic of that. But I think certain environmental law cases, they're so important, and they're at the basis of climate litigation, because eventually these systems will be used to set up climate law cases as well, because there's no thing usually as climate law to rely on. So one that I saw was in Guam, actually, where they filed a human rights complaint against the US military,
All right.
and they are alleging that the military is violating the rights of the indigenous people that live there. I hope I pronounce it correctly, but the Chamorro people, and they're saying that the people's rights to self-determination and clean environment are being violated because the military is really scaling up there, and there's a lot of military activity there, and while they're expanding on that territory as a military, they're damaging the environment, they're damaging biodiversity, but to an extent that it's already irreversible, and it's already damaged the environment and even people's health so much that it's already impacting their day-to-day life. So that's a huge one, because it's a major institution that they're filing against. It's a US company, and it's a Guam law firm that's doing that. So it's really good. It's the essence of environmental justice in a case.
Right. And so that, I mean, so their counterparty is the DoD, is the Department of Defense in the U.S., right? So that's who they're suing, right? Okay. And that is interesting, and I think it's fascinating because again, it's more tort based, I guess, if that's the right way of thinking about it. Because again, you're the lawyer and I'm not, but basically, a lot of environmental law seems to be like, I can show that you did this damage. It was either negligent or reckless, or did something else that caused harm, or it's going to cause harm, and therefore you have a responsibility to do something about it, the harm that's been caused. Is that basically it?
It could. I haven't read the case itself yet, but it could be. Most of it
In
them
general.
in the US are like this, yeah. And they're also citing human rights here, so it might be an additional.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. Yeah, you see that there. But yeah, it's interesting to see how some of these things unfold, because it's I think, yeah, it is more of an American thing to think about, like, how am I going to get that bag? Because that's just how people think. I did it's a good random question and thought. Like, I wondered when I saw the Chagos Islands, Diego Garcia, the thing, the UK making a agreement with Mauritius to give over, give up its supposed sovereignty of that territory and hand it to Mauritius. And you consider, like, the climate vulnerability of a jurisdiction like the Chagos Islands. And I just wondered, at the back of my mind, is like David Lammy or someone else going, like, you know what? I don't want this in my books. I just don't want this. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to have some of the first small island states to be that go under to be on my books. Because, like, when that happens, I mean, presumably it's the ultimate tort, right? Like, I don't know who you sue, right? But if you live on these places and suddenly you can't because the sea swallows them up,
Yep.
that's kind of value destruction, and it's something everyone knew was going to happen, and someone's got to be responsible. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is one of the next big things as well in climate litigation, is that they're going to hold entire countries responsible for these huge impacts and that they historically have caused. So not just their emissions right now, but the things that are actually so deeply unjust that they've caused that are not happening right now. So I hope that is the next one that we're going to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get into Middle East politics because that's just way too complicated. But I think there are some, reasons for slight tempered optimism, but not necessarily great. That institutions like the ICJ and the World Court, are kind of have a little bit more appetite for getting into those kinds of discussions, litigation. But of course, it's a completely voluntary agreement unless you're agreeing to be bound by the jurisdiction of the court. Other than moral suasion, there's not really a lot the court's going to be able to do to enforce a judgment. That I suppose that's where the next frontier about this stuff goes, and why it's going to be super interesting. I'm sure the right wing in America, I'm sure J.D. Vance is super excited about when the United States gets sued. And the World Court may have rules on it and says, like, yeah, you got to fix it, and the Americans go, like, yeah, get lost. So what else is on your radar?
So another one I included is an OECD complaint in the Netherlands. So OECD is a very specific way of doing litigation where you can file a complaint if there's a national body existing in your country, and you can complain to them if a company is violating the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises.
Okay.
And this happens quite a lot, actually. It's not always covered in the news, but this one's really interesting because it's about company Unveils in the North Sea, and from the Netherlands, from Germany, there's been so much action already trying to get that company to stop drilling and to stop with its gas extraction. And this is just another one of these efforts. And the Dutch, so they call it National Contact Point, they've now said, it's taken a while actually because it was filed in January of this year, but they've now said we will look into this further, which is good because it does show that they're actually looking into it. They're actually looking at the merits now rather than just trying to determine if it's a legit complaint and if it's admissible. So they're looking into that. It's a bit of a smaller one. And then the next huge one that I'm really excited about, that I haven't really read anything about it yet, anything big at least. But in North Macedonia, they had a big environmental law case, and a successful one. So now citizens of North Macedonia, they're now able to sue the state over air pollution because the Supreme Court there said citizens have a right to a healthy environment. And that right to a healthy environment includes access to clean air. So now individuals have this way of going to court, demanding compliance, and really holding the government accountable. And the Supreme Court of North Macedonia, they actually were sort of influenced by that EU case against Switzerland. So they relied on it. Again, they said, you have constitutional rights. basic rights that cannot be violated. So although it's not a climate case, this is one of those cases that I mentioned. It's a step towards a climate case because they needed this first, and now they can move towards climate.
And so there's one or two others I appreciate. We're coming up towards time, so I wanted to get in a couple of other stories before while I still have you. One I was super interested is I want to come to Standing Rock in a minute because obviously that's a story that a lot of people will resonate with. But in terms of Norway, obviously it's not all progress all the time. It's one step forward, two steps back sometimes. And so obviously there was a ruling that basically allowed the continued development of 3 oil fields in the North Sea. And there's a case that I guess Greenpeace and Young Friends of the Earth Norway are planning to appeal. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot going on with Norway at the moment, and it's kind of complicated legally to really paint a quick picture of what's going on. But with this case specifically, there's 3 oil fields. Greenpeace and Young Friends of the Earth in Norway they appealed they fought the approvals for those oil fields, and then the case was split in two because one is the injunctions that they have to stop right now with continuing to developing these projects, and that's what I included, and then there's another which is actually should these fields even be there? Are they emitting too much? Which is still ongoing and which has been sent to a European court. But with this one, with the injunctions, they've now said, the injunctions to stop the developments aren't granted. So they'll still continue to develop it right now, which isn't great because the development also causes a lot of emissions. There's a lot of biodiversity affected because of that. So it's a really interesting one, but they already said that they're going to appeal even this ruling, and I'll definitely be looking to see that. But these kind of cases are just really important at the moment because I don't want to continue taking too much time, but if you look at the UK recent cases, for example, they had a huge case about downstream emissions if you are approving projects, and this is actually kind of a similar
Right.
injunction that they're trying to get. But these kind of cases are now replicated across Europe as well, so that's why they're so important.
Okay. No, we'll come. I'd love to come back to that next time. We hope we can get you back on to talk about that because I think it is interesting. We didn't get to talk about the UK. Obviously, took a change in government to kind of change some of the mathematics on that litigation or that case, but it's interesting enough. But before I let you go, I mean, we could talk about the EPA in America. I think that's probably one we'll save because that's not going to go away as a story. But in terms of the Standing Rock, I did not hear about this. So in terms of the Sioux Tribe, people might have heard from 10 years ago, the protests that, sort of in many ways, radicalized the whole generation of, kind of climate and environmental activists, particularly in the US. And they're back in the news. Tell us why.
So they filed a new lawsuit again over the same pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and it's again the same story that's been repeating over and over and over. They're not being consulted, their lands are being damaged, and I think these environmental climate justice cases, they're just among the most important right now because even if a project that's implemented somewhere, even if it's benefiting the climate, which this one isn't, but even if, then still indigenous peoples aren't being consulted, aren't being taken seriously, even if it's their lands that are being that is being affected. So that's why I always include these kind of cases as well, even though they're not traditionally climate litigation. They're so important in making sure that whatever action is taken is done with equality in mind, with human rights in mind, with indigenous people's rights in mind. And this one in particular, it's got such, like you mentioned, it's got such a long backstory. It involves a huge case now against Greenpeace that involving Greenpeace not doing anything wrong, in my opinion, but still being involved in all of this fallout of it. So yeah, a lot going on.
So I think it's one to watch. It's one I'm sure that when it breaks through, it's going to be the kind of story that is going to run and run. That's so emotive, and so many people have so many strong feelings about it. So for those who are, if anyone's read The Deluge, and if you haven't read The Deluge, I am a super fan. I'm sorry to keep bothering you with this stuff. It's Stephen Markley's wonderful novel that will be made into a film or a big 8-season TV show, I'm sure, at some point. Its main characters all start and are very much driven by the events at Standing Rock, and it's a super interesting thing that's influenced not just, activists, but culture. So Loes van Dyke, founder of Climate Court, so great to have you back on the show. Hope we can get you back soon.
Yeah, no worries. I enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
They've been living here for thousands of years. Stand up. We've been fighting for our freedom since the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. Stand up. Like Geronimo, Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier. Stand up. Now they poisoning the waters for our sons and our daughters, so we on the frontier. We won. One nation, one cause, one people, one tribe. Now it's us against the pipeline. Get on your feet for Standing Rock, and we'll show you how strong we could be when we unify.
If you liked this conversation, please share it and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like an ad-free version of this podcast, consider becoming a paid subscriber at wickedproblems.earth. You'll also get our newsletter, all our show notes, member-only goodies, and you'll be supporting media that wants to tell the stories at the frontier of climate tech, the place where people and politics, technology and capital meet and shape the future. And whether it's one you'd want to live in. Wicked Problems is written and edited by Richard Delevan. Production assistance was provided by me, Theodore Delevan. Wicked Problems, Climate Tech Conversations, is a production of Wicked Problems Limited. Thanks again for listening.
Before water has gasoline in it. Malcolm X moment. Martin Luther King with a dream and war boning. Wounded knee plus Alcatraz doggone it. This is for the rock with prayers we stand on it.
Oh yeah, we playing on it, the earth we camp on it. In a sweat lodge singing our songs with grandfathers. Heat rocks all in the spot. We splash on them with a beatbox from my boy. We jam on it. Said a prayer for the black snake killers. Praying on the front lines, they are the realest. Stand for your people, stand for your family. Stand with Standing Rock, stand for humanity.